Fellow Naughty Steppers, welcome once again to another review, and today is a big day because this is not just any review, but the first album review for the Nawtystep channel. I'm extremely excited to be talking about a much more substantive project in terms of the amount of songs covered, and going much more in depth with a specific collection of tracks. Because in many cases the album format is much more fitting for telling a story and creating themes, especially in comparison to the EP, which mostly groups together a selection of bangers. Oh yeah, nice little banger. Oh yeah. This isn't to say that stories aren't or haven't been told in EPs, or that every album has its own direct journey, but I'd certainly say that these are the common things, especially with regards to their opposites. And so it is with great pleasure that for my first album review on the Nawtystep channel, I will be talking about Overload by Kayzo. Now, Kayzo is an artist who has been a little bit hit and miss for me since I started listening to him in 2015, where his track Burner was one of my undoubted favourites of that whole year. And in 2016 I got into his riveting style even more through tracks like Can't Stop and his remix of Propaganda with Gamma, which fucking slams. But in general I would say that he is someone who, in my opinion, creates very seizing sounds but doesn't quite muster up the ideas and the shaping of his tracks to go with that. In relatively recent EPs of his that have been released for the likes of Barong Family and then Monstercat alongside Slander, I feel there has been little to be desired when I was aware of the monstrous sound that he could produce within his tracks. So coming into this album I had a little bit of trepidation, wondering about how his approach to making music would stretch out across 11 tracks. But simultaneously I was anticipating this one very highly because I am a massive fan of artists who consistently bring different genres of music together to create their own style, and especially in their own drops, as Kayzo does. The melding of dubstep and trap and hardcore/hardstyle and big room sort of sounds is something that Kayzo has become renowned for, and he has to be lauded for his ambition in that respect. He is one of those producers who I don't feel you could narrow down to one particular style of music. But on with the album, and the opening track, Follow You, brings together quite thrilling, gripping dubstep sounds with a brilliantly angelic vocal from Devin Oliver. And in spite of the change up in the second drop with the contained stabbing notes over a hardcore style beat, it's hard to think of anything else but the vocal, such is the grace in its delivery. Which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but I'm kind of left thinking that it's not the singer that I came for, it's the producer. And it's from here on in that, as the listener, you realise that Kayzo reverts to similar patterns quite often throughout Overload. Vocal, dubstep drop, hardcore drop, and all of its slight alterations. He dabbles with some drum and bass in the track Floating, but I feel like this is the only point where he truly ventures from that method. Aside from the slower tempos posed by Never Alone, which pits Kayzo's style very well against Krimer's, and In My Head as the album draws to a close. Which actually sounds good in principle because it sets a theme that an album of this length could require, but I'm afraid it just doesn't quite work in this case, because the sameness of it is clear to the extent that it's difficult to notice much else. There are definitely moments where Kayzo distances the audience from the heavier, more hard-hitting stuff that we have come to know him for. But there is no track here that drastically drifts away from that method. Nothing showcasing that Kayzo can produce whole tunes beyond the intro, build-up, drop framework that epitomises this type of music. Something which I would say is very welcome in a heavy album of this type. Think of tracks like Far Away in Skrillex's Recess, or Interstellar from Excision's Codename X, or No Time in Barely Alive's debut album, and the many, many other examples. Having said this, I do really like the way that the album ends with the track Waiting being stripped to its bare bones. It certainly makes for a nice change when put in perspective of the mass of sounds that occur beforehand. And there are some amazing little snippets of sound smattered throughout this album. Like at 201 of the title track Overload and the manipulation of Mika Martin's rasping voice. Or the opening seconds of Feel the Power being a fantastically brief midway point of reflection for the listener. Or the old school feel to the drops of We Are the Monsters, which, of all artists, reminded me of something that Magnetic Man would have produced. or between 107 and 113 of the final track Waiting, which follows some high-pitched escalating notes with some really juicy, string-plucked, contorted sound effects. But one part I can say that I wasn't too keen on was in the track Alright Then, where Kayzo creates a great structure and has so many good-sounding elements to the track, but compromises this with some superfluous guitar additions that very much take away from the track, rather than add anything to it. And as albums go, there is a definite repetitiveness to this one. Kayzo clearly has his own particular styles of production that he likes to adhere to, and he hardly ventures from those frameworks. I mean, every song, bar one, has some sort of worded vocal pervading it. And as aforementioned, whilst I realise that this is a formidable component of Kayzo's music, I wouldn't say it's what I came for. And it leaves me wondering as to whether Kayzo has enough faith in his music to let that do the talking, because in many cases on this album, the vocal is at the forefront and not the instrumental. But as I said earlier, maybe this is just a staple of his music that we, as listeners of it, must accept and appreciate for what it is. And by this, I think I'm asking whether these beautiful, vulnerable, emotion-driven vocals, whether they are vocal samples or actual vocalists themselves, are inherent to Kayzo's style of production. And I said this earlier, but I will always be excited for new Kayzo music because he has that incredible potential that I have witnessed him produce in several tracks over the past couple of years. But I do feel like he has moved on from the really heavy stuff in order to incorporate those lighter elements into his sound more and more over time. So whilst this album certainly has a theme, I wouldn't say it has a story or takes us on a journey by any means. But maybe this was Kayzo's intention, not to provide a trajectory across 11 tracks, but to just say, look, here is my sound, whether you like it or not. And in that respect, I must say it is very consistent. Moreover, even though I may not have liked this album as much as I thought I would, this doesn't detract at all from the fact that I would absolutely love to see him live at some point in my life. I mean, I would safely bet that pretty much all of these songs would sound great when backed up by some huge speakers and a massive crowd of other bass lovers who were going at it in exactly the same way that I would be. Such is the sheer power of this music. You know, even though I might not enjoy the majority of his ideas on this album with respect to what he's produced in the past, it doesn't mean to say that the riveting sound and style that I came to love him for is not present at points here. And beyond that, I'm very excited to see where Doghouse Recordings goes in the future, which kind of artists he brings into it, whether they'll be similar to him or of completely different genres within the EDM realm. Artists from completely different walks of the electronic music life. But in terms of a favourite track from this album, I would have to go from the introductory one, Follow You, which I think best pulls together the main aspects that permeate this album as a whole. That being the stunning vocal and dubstep, hardcore, big room combination that is present in so many of the tracks on Overload. In terms of recommendations, then if you like this album, I would definitely recommend checking out the aforementioned Gamma, and if you like the hardcore aspect of this thing, then I would go for the likes of Pegboard Nerds and possibly some Different Heaven. And so the first album review for the Nawtystep channel draws to a close. Thank you very much once again for watching. If you could give this video a big thumbs up, I would really appreciate it. And also share it about with anyone who you think would be interested in this concept. I have to get to 100 subscribers before I can change my URL, so that's another thing I would really greatly appreciate. Beyond that, subscribe to the channel down below and leave a comment with your thoughts on this album from Kayzo. What did you guys make of it? And be sure, as always, to like and follow Nawtystep across all social media too. Jeez, I should be a news anchor. Why the bloody hell am I doing this for? Everything linked, including recommendations, in the description box down below. If it's naughty, then you know, peeps. So keep it naughty and stay safe. God, I have absolutely no idea what those arm movements were. I'm so sorry, I just got a bit carried away. See you in the next one. Peace!